Hi, folks. This is Ask the Master with John Watson, International Master John Watson, and you're on ICC TV. The main idea of the show is to provide players with a forum to ask questions about chess and the chess world. This is a new venue for some of you. Well, we got on IC a couple of weeks ago and it seems to be working. If you want to participate in the chat, which is on the right of your screen, and ask me questions, which I hope you will need to be logged into YouTube, which is already automatic for most of you, but you can check there. You can log in right on that screen, and it's pretty easy to do. All right, first I have an email address that you can write to if you want to ask a question in advance, and that's askimwatson@chessclub.com. I got a few of these this week, so that was good. So you can simply email me at askimwatson@chessclub.com. That gets to me straight away. We still have the Twitter channel, hashtag AskIamWatson, and you can also send a message to my ICC handle, which is John L. Watson. So that would be message space John L. Watson, and then your message. The alternative is to ask a question live right now during the show. So you can ask about anything related to chess, a lot of questions about openings, some about training, some about role models. So this week, for example, chess strategy, books and videos. Books, we haven't had many about books, but I'm kind of an expert on a lot of chess books, which I've written a lot of. So, okay, so anyway, let's just get started because we have a ton of questions I was sent, and I'm sure we'll have some chat questions too, which we don't have any from all. Everybody's saying hi. Oh yeah, tell me where you're from. That's a great idea. John Hartman says hello from Omaha. So the rest of you might want to think about saying the same thing. Tell me what city you're from, which I think is kind of a fun thing. I'm in San Diego, California right now. I'll be in London for the next show, oddly enough. Okay, now I wanted to say before anything else a correction. Last show we had streaming issues. So if you look at it on YouTube, you'll see that quite a few things were messed up where I would be dropped temporarily. Hopefully that won't happen today. By the way, if there's anything wrong with the sound, just tell me on the chat channel. And but I also made a big mistake, and the big mistake was not corrected. This is from 2 weeks ago, and I just wanted to show you this. Excuse me. This is crazy. I'm doing the wrong thing here. Let me give 1 second here. I need to go here, and whoops, I need to, give me a second. Where's there it is. Wow. Okay, what I wanted to show you is, oh yeah, one more time. I showed this last time, but I think it got X'd out in the streaming issues. So here we have King's Indian, and I was just talking about how in the H3 variations, almost always when black plays E5, you play D5. And in fact, Alex Yermolinsky, who all of you know on ICC, gave a lecture series about this, and he mentioned that principle too, that E5, you don't want to leave this hanging. And I gave the amazingly bad example. What I meant was something like this, for example, and then white makes a move, and then black plays here, and then white usually should play there. Or there's countless other examples. This, here, here, now white should play here. Unfortunately, I gave you this very silly example, which actually someone fell into against me once. I was white, and white immediately wins the game here, or at least wins material, by playing this move, hitting C7, which is a whole rook, or hitting F6, which is a piece. So black has to sacrifice the exchange, and it's not good enough. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that was a correction that everybody got. So now last week there were a couple of things that were kind of blocked off by the streaming issues. So what I want to do is repeat a couple of the things that I said. Somebody asked me about the Scandinavian and what a good weapon might be against it, or what a good thing. Since the answer got cut up, let me just briefly repeat that I recommend delaying this move knight c3, which is the natural move. This is what usually happens, and then black can play here, or sometimes all the way back. It's not that bad to go to d8. And that's a standard Scandinavian. It's obviously fine for white, but it's also interesting for black at least. An interesting way to avoid a bunch of theory is to play this move, 4 knight f3. And by the way, I understand why you wanted me to give the moves audially. It's because the video wasn't coming through, so my apologies for that. I'll try to mention the moves as often as I can. I tend to just say here, here, here. The idea is you're delaying knight c3. You might still play it, but you also have the chance of just to play d4 and maybe even c4 to attack the queen, and maybe even d5. So it's a very flexible move. And I think I gave a couple of positions, but I think I'll just sort of leave it at that. I think this is a good way to play. For example, after this, you do play d4, but you've still got this nice idea. For example, if black played into some sort of knight c6 thing, you might very soon play c4, maybe even already might be a good time. Or you might throw this in first, and then c4 next move. I like this system. It's kind of fun. You probably get about exactly the same kind of small advantages you do against knight c3, but it's a little safer and easier to remember. What else did I skip? There were some parts about this knight c3 answer that got cut off a little bit. So I just wanted to mention that in this French defense question that I got about h6, I said that several people had played this move, and what you don't want to do then is play here. Because after a move like this, which looks okay because you're going to counterattack in the center, white can play this nice little move. And then you've got a bad version of a typical French defense where the h6 doesn't even look very good. White has a chance to play f4 and knight f3, and there's nothing much black can do about that. And then white's center is just terrific, and he has a big advantage in space. And this bishop, which is usually not a problem in the French, really becomes a big problem. So this is not, and f5 is an issue. So this is not something you want to do. The knight f6 plan, which is what you play against other moves, but with the bishop on d3, as so often in the French, you can simply play that move. And what that means, for example, is if this pawn gets isolated, and I'm not saying these are necessarily the best moves, but if this pawn gets isolated, probably you're going to play here first, and black takes this, then the bishop's in the way of the attack on the isolated pawn. It turns out this is very free and easy play for black, very easy to play. So that was another thing. There are a few other things that I think got cut off a little bit, and maybe we'll get to them as time goes on, but I think those were the most important ones. So let's get to questions. There's all kinds of good questions. There's one here already on the chat, but I think I'll do one that I've already been asked about. Well, this is kind of long. I've got a lot of prepared questions, or questions that were asked me during the week or yesterday or this morning, and I will get to those, but let's do a chat question first. I would like to play some lines in the roue with black which are sharp but sound. I'm thinking about the open roue. What do you think? Now this is XHRABITOS, and I think you asked a question similar last week about the Schliemann. You can say yes or no if you did. About the Schliemann versus the Marshall. Is that right? Were you the person who asked that question? Somebody asked about the Schliemann versus the Marshall. Well, regardless of whether it was you, yeah, here it is. I can't choose between the Marshall and the Schliemann. So that was your question last week. This time it's the open roue. Let me answer your last week question first because I never got to it and I felt bad about that. This is the roue Lopez. Everybody knows that Spanish game. And last week you were asking about the difference between playing a couple of sharp lines, and the sharp lines were the Marshall Gambit, and I guess I'm going to do that very quickly actually. Here, whoops, sorry, not there, here, and here, this line after h3 playing here, the Marshall Gambit, which has to do with, I'm sorry, what am I doing? This is terrible. Playing Rookie 1, sorry, got to defend that. And here. It's been a while since I've seen the Marshall Gambit, but you're giving up a pawn here. So that's one way. The problem with this line, in my opinion, given what you're trying to get, is that you get these, and you mentioned this, that there are these extremely drawish endgames where black has to actually defend and get the draw. And in fact, the Marshall is considered a drawing weapon, at least on the top levels. So it doesn't sound like that's what you want, because it's not truly a sharp opening in the sense that you want it to be, I think. And the other thing you asked me about, you said Spielmann, I assume is Spielmann Gambit. I think you meant Schliemann Gambit, which is this move. I hope you meant that because that's what I sort of was going to talk about. And I think that's a much better choice. You said something about your king being airy, and that might be a problem, but I would suffer with that. You're trying to get active play, and I don't think the king is usually much of a target in reality. I mean, there are lines like that, but they're easy to memorize, and White probably won't play them. White will probably end up just playing a slow line like that. White may even be a little bit better here, but it's interesting and fun and active. So I would recommend that line of those two. This week you're asking about the Openroy, which is actually kind of a cool idea, which goes basically like this, castles, and just taking this guy. And after this, a lot of times this happens, this kind of thing. Now White's attacking this twice, Black plays here. This is the main line of the Openroy. Okay, so the question was, where are we here? What do you think? Are there any lines which give White some advantages easily? No, certainly not easily. I think it's a really good practical weapon. There's some very nice books about it. Anand, of course, played it. I still see it played. It's not quite as popular now, which makes me think that White probably at the very top levels, which makes me think at the very top levels, White has some very small advantage in some lengthy theoretical line. I don't think you probably have to worry about that. When you have to play your match against Kramnik, you don't want to play this, but or not that Kramnik plays e4, but somebody who plays e4, or Karyakin, you don't really want to play this probably, but that's the only person, and that would just be because it's too hard to get a draw or something. So yeah, I think it's a great system. It's really fun, really wide open piece play, and I think you'll enjoy it a lot actually as an active attacking player. On the top level, has it turned into a drawing weapon? I don't know if that's true. It's quite possible. John Hartman knows, he's tried, I think. He's played this before, the Schliemann. Let's go back to the Schliemann. The question is, good contribution from the listeners here. The question is this turned into a drawing weapon? So maybe there's some lengthy line. There are some very famous lengthy main lines that maybe you do have to accept a draw in, but I don't think White would intentionally play into those lines because they're very, very forcing. This could be. I'm not sure. I haven't kept up with it. I know that in practice I see this all the time, and that's certainly not drawish. That's, you just play normal moves, and both sides play interesting chess. Sometimes White even comes back here to try and stop you from castling. And there are a lot of other ways that you can play as White too. There are some super ultra main lines that maybe is what you're talking about that lead to drawish positions, but I don't think you're playing it in order to get a draw. The difference is that in the Marshall, it's hard for White to choose other lines, and it's hard for White to deviate. So once Black plays d5, White's really got to kind of go for it. Whereas here, White has plenty of options of playing slowly and trying to get an advantage, but probably won't enter into any very drawish lines that are forced draws. Okay, so Karyakin can even draw against d3 apparently, because Karyakin uses it as White. But I mean, I just don't think of this, at least in practice, for a player as Black asking this question. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to win against this move d3, for example. I mean, Karyakin using it as Black or as White? Oh, Rajabov. Oh, that's right. Rajabov plays it as Black. Yeah, but I mean, the point is that you don't have to use it as a drawing weapon, and as I like to say, in a case, it depends what White does. If White plays a line like this, obviously either side can play for a win. Okay, that's interesting. I'm glad we got some input because I don't really know that. Yeah, Rajabov is the most famous of the Schliemann players. I don't know if he's still playing it or what's going on. Okay, now let me go to one of the questions I got during the week. There's so many of them. I thought maybe I'd start with a slightly complicated one, but one that a lot of people have asked me over the years. A lot of lower players especially keep running to the London system, which is the move bishop f4 either here or after d5. It's called the London system. And the question is, when should White play h3 in the London? You might want to discuss when you should play this move. As far as I can tell, maybe one should wait to see what Black does with his king's bishop. And that's a good point. I've got a game with this. I've got actually a few things to show. It's not even the whole game, so I don't want to take too much time. But I do want to take time to talk about this because I did a little research, actually it was this morning on this, and I found some fascinating things about it. Let me go to that. That's a good question. We'll do that soon. Now, first of all, let me just show you. I'll see if it's the same move order. No, it's not. So let me show you this famous game, Spassky-Bukic. And I'm really not going to show you the game. I'm just going to show you the first few moves to talk about this H3 idea. Now the reason here's concretely, so you understand what's going on, what we're talking about. The minute Black plays D6, there's this idea of maybe playing Knight H5. So in this game, it went here. I'm sorry, castles, Bishop E2 on the fifth move, D6, and you might think already he might be threatening Knight H5. Now, why threatening? Threatening because, let's say, White does a sort of nothing move, and Black goes here. It may be hard to keep that bishop, and Black's trying to get a bishop for a knight, which is an advantage in chess. He's also unmasking this. So if he can manage to exchange his bishop for a knight, even if it costs him a little bit of time, most people think that's a pretty good trade-off. And so already we've got that kind of question coming up. So in the famous game Spassky-Bukic, Spassky played, whose move is it here? He played, didn't play A3, played here, and actually allowed Knight H5, and every book claims that Knight H5 is too early now. They all think this is fine for Black. But I was looking at it, and I'm thinking maybe that's not true. The point is, okay, the bishop can't go those ways without getting exchanged at least. So it goes that way, and now it looks like Black can track it down and then exchange it on G3, which is what he wants, and that's quite a decent position for Black. What everybody always says is that White can make this move Knight D2 here, exclamation point, usually it's given. And then the idea is that if takes, takes, and White's supposed to have some sort of positional advantage. So that looks logical and normal. But and what they usually show also is that Black has this clever move here, threatening to simply take this, and then if White takes that, he can take this. That's the idea. And then you examine this position to decide what you think about it. Usually, okay, this is attack now, so usually you just defend that, and then they show a bunch of moves, and White gets some advantage, and that's probably true. These pawns are kind of weak, and for some reason the center is not working out for Black. Okay, so, but in the main line, after simply taking and taking, now this is supposed to be good for White because of Black's bad pawn structure, and White's got already kind of an outpost there. And it's true that if you get a move like this, White usually tends to be better. You can even play this move and really control those light squares. But I was looking at this. So Black's supposed to play F5 supposedly, and I think this also gives White quite an advantage, even after just a simple move like that. But I was looking at this, and I'm just looking at a move like that and there, and I looked at this for a while, and Black just wants to play the knight there, and this is actually not only quite playable, but I think very pleasant for Black. I think this is about equal. So it makes you wonder about this whole idea of playing knight FD2, of allowing that. Now, how could you have avoided that? You may be confused. The question was when to play H3. Well, you could have played H3 here and stopped that, because now that's a pointless move. It just puts the knight on the side of the board. So maybe my answer would be earlier than I realized. You might want to play it in this position. Now let's look at this game. I'll try not to spend too long on this question, but I think it's kind of fascinating because the book explanations I don't think are very good. This is from Cyrus Lactawala's book, and but pretty much every book says the same thing. This is a standard way of playing. And okay, so Black plays like this, very, very common sort of thing, and Black's had some trouble in these positions recently, so White's been pretty happy. Now I think maybe you want to play it already, even though the books don't really indicate that. And Black can try and break through with E5. It's a very interesting game. I think White has some chances to keep a tiny advantage. But in this game, like as in most games, he plays there. And I think here's a position. Here Black actually played this, Black played this move, and White played here, and White gets a small advantage. This is a very well-known theory, by the way, because Black almost never plays knight H5. But actually, I think knight H5 is very interesting. So theory says that White should play here. Now, I guess White could try this, but I think Black's got a really nice initiative here. And I analyzed this for a while. I think you'll find that this is fine for Black. You probably get your pawn back too. So what White always does is this move, the one we just talked about. Here, 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 and then White moves this. And in this position, of course, it can't go to D2, so it goes to E1. And everybody gives that an exclamation point. Actually, I think you should just play bishop g3 instead and just give up the bishop pair, and then maybe it's only about equal. So here I think black should either take immediately or play knight f4. I guess take. Oh, that's right. Might as well take, because now black gets an extra tempo playing here and actually ends up a pawn ahead in most variations. So white's going to take back. Now if white takes back that way, the knight has that beautiful square and you're going to get the bishop pair anyway. And so white takes back here, and now black plays this clever move, and it does work this time. Because if here and here, all of a sudden that square is kind of weak, that pawn's kind of weak. And it's hard to defend. I mean, if a move like that, maybe you'll just play here. Also, the bishop is coming out nice and smoothly, and you might throw h3 in, but you don't really even need to. So this position black's actually better in. He's more active, and that pawn actually will fall no matter what white does. So that's a good sign. So this is interesting. This is non-theoretical stuff. And then the other choice is to simply retreat, of course. And the problem with that, of course, is it lets this bishop come off. And that's a good bishop. That's a light squared bishop. So in my opinion, now you can just go here, for example, attacking that. And then put your bishop out here next, and you have no problems at all. So this is very interesting. That it's a good question, because when I actually started looking at it concretely, I think maybe white should play h3 earlier than is given in the books, if he wants to maintain any kind of advantage, which most people do. So in other words, I don't think castling is good. I think he should go ahead and try that. Now the problem with that is with the king in the center, sometimes this move has a little more effect, or this move has a little more effect. But nevertheless, I think it's probably necessary to play this way. Okay, let's look at chat for a second here. See what we've got on the chat. Schliemann and the Marshall, yeah. That was me. Good. I hope I answered that. Carlsen won with the London against Radoslav. I saw that. I saw Carlsen winning. That was the very last game he played. The last round at the European Championship games, European Cup, I think. Yeah, that was yesterday. And very good game. Excellent game, by the way. I don't know about the opening so much, but you'll enjoy the game. I would recommend going and looking up that game. Quite nice the way he just sort of centralized. It's a funny position. Towards the end, there are 3 pieces against 3 pieces. Carlsen just centralizes his queen suddenly, and black's pretty much lost. It's a very odd position. You'd think black could hold it, but it's typical of Carlsen games. It's just it's a mystery almost. The pieces just all are going to the right squares. All the tactics are working out. It's a very, very pretty game. Okay, let's do a couple more. There's some abstract questions that I wanted to answer. Well, here's one thing. How can I improve my thought process, both in strategy and analysis? I get quite a few questions like this. Which method do you think is more useful for amateurs and around 1900 FIDE rating? Now, I've been a teacher for a long time, and my feeling is this varies from student to student. It's just an individual matter, because you have to know, first of all, what you're doing wrong. You have to analyze, or someone else has to analyze for you, or both, what's wrong with your thinking process, what's going on, because there's so many different issues. Sometimes players overthink, and they're just missing the big issues, the big picture, and that can happen. I think even more often, people play on principle. They try to play fairly quickly, make good common sense moves. They play on intuition, and they miss the specifics and the unique features of the position. And one way to think about that is that you got to be a little careful, because if people could just play naturally and intuitively, chess wouldn't be all that interesting, for one thing. But also your opponents are going to play naturally, intuitively. How are you ever going to get an advantage? You need to be looking, broaden your search for moves that are possible, but don't dwell on them. That would be what I would say. So let me give you a few tips that I actually wrote out here. I think you need to use your opponent's time for general considerations, things like plans, tactical themes, weaknesses, examining the weaknesses and seeing on both sides, also both sides' attacking prospects, and just sort of see what you think is going on generally. What's the situation and what's likely to happen? But then use your time for looking at specific variations. Now that doesn't mean you still aren't thinking about general ideas to some extent, but you do it in the context of looking at moves. Basically, I just mean I go here, he goes there, I go here, he goes there. So you're testing the ideas that you looked at, that you're thinking of in general, by looking at specific positions. And try not to repeat analysis. I think I mentioned this last week. If you repeat analysis too much, then you're just using up too much time. At some point, you have to have faith in what you're seeing. And if it's wrong, so be it, but that's better than using up huge amounts of time and then being wrong 3 or 4 times later in the game because you didn't have time to make a decent move at all. So also try to be, it may be that you're not systematic enough. That's of course obvious, not self-disciplined enough. Identify the candidate moves that you're interested in and that you want to look at and go over them one at a time. But also, again, on your first look at your candidate moves and also while analyzing, try to keep your mind open. Try to look over the whole board briefly. Look at kind of a bunch of moves before you settle down to 1 or 2 lines. Because remember, your opponent has also seen all those moves that you're about to make, all the natural and obvious moves. So if you just play those, you're just not going to get much better. You're not going to beat a lot of players. You'll beat some of them, but they'll beat you for the same reason. So basically, I'm saying that common sense only goes so far, and that you need to. What makes chess interesting, actually, is that at some point you have to see ideas that are not the most obvious first moves, but do more good than the move you might be considering the most obvious move. So for tactics, you can try various things. Everybody has different advice. Obviously, practice, practice, practice. And you can practice specifically with tactical positions. There's plenty of great books of tactics and combinations. And there are also plenty of things on the web. This program, Chess Tempo, is extremely popular with my students and sounds like a great program. I haven't actually used it, but it seems like an excellent thing. And there are so many collections of tactical problems on various websites and, as I say, in books. So that would be what I would say. Okay, what would be the next thing to look at? I got a question about, just got this question in. Well, let me do some things that I can answer briefly, and then we'll get right back to chat questions. Are there any openings you think are better suited for blitz than longer time controls? Dodgy gambits might be one idea, but any mainstream openings? Very good question. The problem is I'm a terrible blitz player, especially online, so my advice really isn't very useful, probably, but I'll make a few stabs. One thing is this would definitely depend on your style. Because if you're good at tactics, then you obviously want more complicated openings. You want openings that keep the pieces on the board, basically, because in blitz, it's just a matter of how many pieces are there that presents how many tactics and complicated opportunities there are. For example, kings, Indians, or Sicilians. But if you're better in simplified positions and you can play faster than your opponent in simplified positions, I would play slower openings that try to get more pieces off the board, maybe even some exchange variations of various openings. And I think that's a pretty obvious advice that I can't go too wrong with. I think in general, the one little tip I might have is any position you can get with 2 knights versus 2 bishops, or 2 knights and a bishop versus a bishop, versus 1 knight and 2 bishops, or even just simply a knight versus a bishop, might be very practical. It might be very nice because knights are tricky to defend against, and in blitz you don't have time. Whereas bishops are hard to figure out how to make them most useful. They take some profound maneuvering to get out and be effective. And often bishops don't really take effect until the late middle game or the end game, and you're probably not even going to get that far. So you're going to gain time on the clock if you have knights. That's the idea. I first heard this from Larson when he was playing blitz with somebody. He said, I always just get knights, and because they're tricky and you can't figure out, the defender has to really. It's just not natural. The knight doesn't move naturally, and so often the defender will miss easy things or have to spend a lot of time meeting them. Let me see what another good question is here. I was going to show you this one game. Let me see about this. Okay, this has to do with a question about the Bogo-Indian. We haven't talked about that yet, so let's take a look at that. And this has to do, I brought up a game to explain it. It's actually a theoretical question, but I thought it was kind of fun because it's a nice game to look at anyway. Just pretend this is a lecture. This is the whole game we're going to look at this time. Now first, what is the Bogo-Indian? Well, you don't have to play e6 first. Normally you would play this first. And if white wants to avoid the Nimzo-Indian, which is this, bishop b4, white might want to play knight f3 on the third move. And then black has a lot of choices. He has the Queen's Gambit declined, the Queen's Indian, the Benoni, but a very popular choice is the Bogo-Indian. And one thing white can do against the Bogo-Indian is, well, the normal move is to play here. One of the normal moves is just to exchange those bishops. If white wants to keep more pieces on the board, or maybe get the bishop pair if black takes it, knight b2 is very interesting. I used to play this all the time. This is my favorite way to play against the Bogo-Indian. It's the second most popular way, but it's still pretty reasonable. And in this game, black simply castles. So the question, and that's very, very common, and I don't have this position because he got it by transposition. Here's the way the game actually went. And black castled. I won't talk about the theory. Now, well, I'll talk really briefly. The most common move is this, or at least used to be. And white can play here, followed by here and here. I used to like this line where you take with the bishop, and then you try to reroute the bishop either here or here, and then you play e3. And I had really good luck with that. In this game, black retreats, which has been popular in recent years, and was actually popular many years ago, but then got a little bit less popular because of this move, which again, white is still playing. Okay, so white wants to keep space and not let black free himself in the center. The only problem with this is now he has space, he has good development. The problem is that these pawns are a little bit vulnerable because when black plays c5, white's would like to play c3 and protect that. It's like a French. And he can't do that. So instead he has to use the fact that he's got more space to get some other kind of advantage. Okay, and in fact black does attack. Notice that white's thinking of aiming down this way. And white plays that move. And that was the question. What do you think about h4? Is this sound? Is this a good move? I can't remember the exact question, but it was basically, what do you think about this move? Is it any good? Well, what's the point of h4? A lot of you will see right away what the first point is. The first point is if black plays slowly, white's got a very famous sacrifice, this guy. And then after that move he has this, and now black is really completely lost. Because what happens is in a position like this is the famous Greek sacrifice. And black is getting killed because anytime white takes that, black takes that, white has the file. And black can't stop checkmates. I mean, move like this and mate follows. So, so that's the threat. This bishop takes h7. And you can look at that at your leisure later. So black usually plays g6, as it turns out. And it turns out h6 has this problem. It's not a bad move, h6, but it does have the problem that white can sort of pile up here and threaten to go here and weaken the king side more. I don't know if it's worth going into a lot of detail. There's one line maybe that's interesting to see here. If black tries to break up the center, and white takes these off and threatens checkmate down here, and black doesn't want to play here because of either e6 or even better h5. That's just a win for white basically. But black does have this nice move, which is not so bad. And what happens, I think, what's interesting in positions like this is that white now concentrates on the center. White doesn't try to mate anymore. White just goes here, gets time to defend this pawn, and then can, for example, even if black protects this, can play here, getting pressure that way. And by the way, when a bishop is blocked off on this diagonal, it often wants to go to the other diagonal. And then the point is next, what happens next is castles and recapturing here, and white has a huge positional advantage. Black's poorly developed and his pieces don't really have anywhere to go. That knight can't really get out of the way. So that's kind of a cute idea. Now in the game, he played the normal move, which was g6. And white played the most aggressive move. There have been other moves played here. Just recently, very recently, a 2700 player played the move b4. I think h5's a little more pressing, or a little more, it's certainly more interesting. And now I think white should take, technically speaking, white should take this. And black always takes this way. You'll see why later. And then here, threatening here. And then this move. And now this is a fascinating position. I think white should castle here, giving up the fact that he's won that file, because he's forced a positional concession by forcing black to take that way. And it turns out he likes his position in the center. So even though this is not obvious at first, I think that you will enjoy this position. The typical example, real quick, would be something like this. Overprotect that pawn and just go here. I think this is good. Here and here. Get your pawn back and you have space and a positional advantage, and this bishop is still bad. So that's That's a way he could have played, and that means that I can answer the question, is h4 any good? Well, I think it is pretty good. I think if you get positions like this, you're in pretty good shape. Now in the game, white did something else, which wasn't bad, but black could have done a lot better. White simply got his pieces out and protected this square. And black played this move, and that's really the most serious mistake of the game. I think black wants to defend this way to cover that key square down there, and it's just a little too slow. I think black should play immediately here because it's with tempo. And that brings the queen away from the defense, but it turns out there's really no time for white to react to the fact that black's blasting away at the center here. In fact, what he should do is play something sort of tactical here, which is this way. But it turns out that this works out very well for black. I think black avoided this. Black's a very good player, by the way. Black avoided this because I think he was worried about this kind of position here. I'm sorry, with taking first or bishop takes. I think just bishop takes. And that move, strange to say, would probably win, except that black can just defend. Let me see if I've got that right. Maybe rook h7. Yeah, rook h7. Oh, okay, that's it. He's probably very afraid of this move, because after a move like that, white has this, attacking the queen, and that threatens checkmate over here too. So black would have to sacrifice the queen or something, and then white's quite a bit better. But it turns out that after that sacrifice, if black, now over the board, how are you going to see this? But it turns out black's better in this position. Just because he's got all his pieces out, he's still a piece up, and if white takes that piece back, then excuse me, that's something I should attend to. Sorry about that. And now black's just getting all his pieces out much faster. White's undeveloped, and white can't win that piece because of rook e8. Okay, so that's probably what black missed, and you can forgive him for that, right? That's certainly something easy to miss. But it turns out that, so that's maybe why black tried to play that very conservative move. Okay, takes. Now you almost never want to take back with the h-pawn in a position like this. I mean, in this case, I think you could probably just play here and run in there. Maybe not. That's not so easy. Maybe just defend this first. It's just a very awkward position because the h-file is open, and you're going to get really hurt badly on that. Taking with the f-pawn gives you a little extra room. It's a little better even if the rook's here to go here, but still the right way to take. And okay, so white just develops, and white develops again. And now the only problem with black's position, he is attacking this, but it's a little slow because white's already got the open file and pieces aiming this way. And that's very dangerous. Now white plays a very funny move. He plays here. It looks really strange, but it's actually quite a good move because it gets the queen over there for the attack. Black starts trying to drive that knight away. White plays here, thinking about taking here or taking here. And black takes. Black should move his rook, but white's better anyway. Because right now white played this, but that was a mistake. White had very simply this move, attacking the queen and threatening all kinds of attacks here, and after queen here, this very pretty move. So it's too bad. It would have been a nice way to finish the game. It just turns out this position is indefensible because the other rook's coming over and the queen's coming over, and this square is too weak. So very, very nice way to finish the game. But he didn't play that, and he played here, which also isn't bad, and back, and brought the king over, and did that sacrifice, and that turns out to be decisive anyway in this position. Well, although black should try this now as a defense, attacking the queen, and then just trying to defend that knight, and white's still much better, but at least it's a game. Black instead, I think, took the rook, which is immediate disaster because of this move. Now if black takes that, you simply go check, check, I don't know, something like this, and checkmate. So that's all over. So that meant that if he couldn't take that, you can imagine he's completely doomed. In fact, he resigned here because what's the only other thing he could do? Oh no, he played here first, and white played this way. Because if the king goes here, there's this. So that's simple enough. Okay, so very pretty game and fun to look at, and I thought I'd show you guys that just as an instructive game. Let's move on here. What do we got in the way of chess questions on the chat? Can you recommend some good opening books? Let me just bring up the original board here so you've got something to look at. There we go. So can you recommend good Open Roy books? The best I ever saw, but it's a little old now, so I don't know if there's been a recent one. I think there has been something more recent than this, but Glenn Fleer, who is a tremendous expert on the Open Roy Lopez and played it for years and knows everything about it. He wrote some good articles, but also I think if I remember right, at least in one of his Ruy Lopez books, he has really good stuff on the Open Roy, and I'm pretty sure there's a whole book on the Open Roy Lopez. There may be a more recent book. It sort of rings a bell. You can just look at the top level games to get most of the theory that you need. But so that would be. I wish I had a better recommendation right off the top of my head. You can also just Google that and find out what's available. Within the books that are out there on the Ruy Lopez, most of them recommend other defenses. They don't recommend the Open Ruy. So I don't know how much good stuff you'll find on it. As I say, Glenn Fleer's written great stuff on it, and I'm trying to think who else. It's a little surprising, isn't it? You'd think there'd be more books on the Open Ruy. The Open Ruy is played successfully by Korchnoi. I saw recent games where Black was doing fine on a pretty high level, so may not be completely equal, but it seems like a very good practical weapon, and I think it's a fun one to take up. Okay, so nothing else right now on the chat, so let me just show you some other things that I was asked during the week. Here's one I got. The English opening seems tailored to my profile of deficiencies and also lovely otherwise, it says. Of course, it does not seem to be a first choice at the top level, anyone, at least not by anybody I recognized. Okay, so that's this move, the English opening. I found your suggestion of looking at the games of Ullmann and Berg for the French defense quite useful. Just playing through the moves of some games was most instructive. So you will guess my first question. Are there strong players you would recommend to help navigate through the subtleties of the English opening and the ensuing middle games and recurring structures? So I have a fairly long answer to that. I've written quite a bit about the English, so I think it's really fun to examine who plays it and the whole history of the English. I guess the first thing I'd say is, why isn't this the most popular move? It's, I guess, the third most popular historically, although knight f3 is a close one. The two most popular, of course, are e4 and d4, right? But beyond that, c4 has always been around, but mostly it really didn't show up really strongly until maybe the 30s or so, 30s or 40s, 1930s or 40s. Howard Staunton played it in a surprisingly modern fashion in the 19th century, and there were a couple other players that goofed around with it, but very, very little. Aaron Nimzovich, of course, played some very nice English openings. Most of them, though, and you'll see this with a lot of the top players, started out with this move, to stop e5, and then after some other move by Black, then c4, for example, that move. So Nimzovich played some nice games with, or even, this is another way to get the English opening, that way. And then sometimes Black might play there, and you might keep it in an English opening by playing a move like this, and anyway. So Nimzovich played it and had some really nice ideas, even though there weren't a lot of them. Now, Botvinnik was the first world champion that really played it a lot and had a lot of very interesting, developed the theory actually in sort of a systematic and interesting way. So then there was Taimanov, maybe was a good example, whose games were very instructive, and Petrosian, who played it a fair amount, but mostly he just played beautiful games with it. He didn't play it as much as some other players, but he played very brilliant ideas in the English opening. And the greatest English opening player of all time, I think, is Korchnoi, who played it a lot through the years, very lot, had developed the theory the most, had the best ideas, and would be a great model, to answer your question, would be a great guide. Look at the games of Korchnoi in the English opening. The three other world champions who played the English are worth mentioning at least. Karpov played very nicely, you can imagine, with his style. Kasparov played it more often than people realize. There was actually a little pamphlet, I think, that Bob Long put out of just Kasparov's games in the English opening. There were enough to justify that. There's quite a few if you look at the database. And he managed to get attacking games with it, so that shows you the English is very flexible. You can do all kinds of things. Kasparov got all these active attacking games, typically, with it. And then Kramnik. Now, Kramnik made a living off of playing. He played the English Opening a fair amount when he was young, but mostly he played this. And really, he reached, and then this. And he reached reached the top of the world playing this stuff. He would really frustrate people. Now, of course, a lot of times, for example, if the player would go back into the King's Indian, he would simply transpose to a D pawn. But against other moves like this or this, he wouldn't. He's already out of main line. He'd played normal Englishes, and this he played a lot against all the top players of the world, and he won a lot of nice games with little tiny technical advantages. He also played in the World Championship very successfully, and against in the candidates matches, and in the World Championship against Karpov. They had, for example, this kind of thing with E4, and some very, very beautiful, nice games. I think after this there was a Queen E2 game. There might have been one E5 game. Some people play this move Bishop here. It's all kinds of fun stuff in the English Opening. So Kramnik is of interest, but as I say, it's a little limited because he always has Knight F3 in. Now, of the players who didn't play for the World Championship, although this guy did play for the candidates, the player who really stands out is Wolfgang Ullmann. He has to be one of the greatest English opening players of all time because he played it, first of all, so much. He played probably more than anybody else, played it his whole life, and had tremendous ideas in almost every line, and also managed to get attacking games like Kasparov. He tended to get space and attack. And some other standouts from sort of the time I was growing up are Anderson, Vaganyan, Sakis, Chernin, Gulko, and Timon. But for models, and a person who's more recent and still playing, and has, so you could really learn the opening better, and also get some great games, I think Michael Krasenkov would be the best one to study of the modern players. The other elite players that play it today, not necessarily as models, are Ivanchuk, who plays it very originally, Gelfand, and now Tomaszewski, who is just becoming an elite player and having some fantastic results. And then, of course, everyone uses it sometime. Well, most players play it some. Vashir Lagrave has played it quite a bit, Nakamura, Grischuk. But I think to summarize the whole thing as models, to answer your question directly, I would say Michael Gurevich and Korchnoi and Ullmann. So Korchnoi and Ullmann for the classics and for ideas, and really their theory is still up to date enough to learn a lot. But for really up to date theory, I'd use Michael Gurevich. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure I've missed some important people there, but that's a good start anyway. How are we doing on the chat here? Michalewski, very good, has a book on the Open Rui with quality chess, and it's probably more up to date, and it's probably just excellent. Very good. John Hartman comes through again. That's so Rich Kazarian. I already answered this he asked this by email, and he asked it again. So we just answered that about the Bogo-Indian with Knight BD2. Thanks for that Michalewski recommendation. That's exactly what he needs. What do you think about the Move by Move book series? I think it's great. I mean, it's a nice thing to do. As someone who uses theoretical books a lot and uses opening books a lot, I think the Move by Move series, well, it depends on the author, of course, but you do have to realize that you've got to put your own work into it. Now, that's true of all books, but if you look at some of these, quality chess Grandmaster Repertoire books, maybe even, books like My Play the French, we're supplying an awful lot of more information than, say, a move-by-move book. So a move-by-move book is more getting the ideas, learning how to play. It's great when you start out an opening, especially. And just be a little careful, because I think more often than in other series, you're probably going to get, and then sort of more, quote, serious, unquote books. They're quite serious books. You're going to find that one or two of the lines really aren't that good, or the assessments maybe haven't quite worked out perfectly. But that's what you're supposed to be doing as a studier anyway. In a way, that's almost good, because it means you've got to be critical, and you have to really look carefully at what's going on. And I don't mean to sound, I'm sounding a little too negative here, because they're really great books. They're really wonderful books. And one thing is there's quite a bit of prose in the move-by-move books, and quite a bit of explanation. And everybody likes that. I like that too. I think it's a good, there's two ways to look at it. One is a chess book that doesn't have many words and has a lot of moves, can be kind of depressing or oppressing. But on the other hand, it's what you really need in the long run, and it's the moves that count ultimately anyway. That's how you're going to pick up the ideas anyway, is by studying carefully. So those books are maybe the best of all in my mind. But on the other hand, books that have a lot of explanations are fun and all useful in their own way. It's just two different approaches, and people like either one depending what kind of person they are, I think. Okay, now let's see how many extra questions we can get. Let's see if there's anything that I missed last week specifically that I want to get to, so I don't wait too long. Oh, well, there's kind of a fun question about this this crazy line. Okay, maybe we'll finish with this because we've used quite a bit of time up, but I need to find what I said about it, if nothing else. Be good to get the right question. Okay, basically it goes like this. It's this idea here. Sorry, it's the London system again. It's a London system question. We've talked about this already. We've talked about making that move and how sometimes white plays that move first, or originally, and still to this day, I think, white, instead of making this move first in the London and then sort of playing this move next, he'll get to the same position, but he'll play bishop f4 first on this move. And the reason he does that, as far as I have always heard and what people say, even authors say it in their books, the main reason for doing that is because after this move is awkward or difficult to play against. And black might get equality pretty much more easily than against this. That's the theory. And you have to look at the theory carefully to see why that is. And of course, I would play this move in this position. But traditionally, this has been considered a dangerous gambit. It's the Albin gambit. We talked about this already in an earlier show. It's the Albin gambit with a tempo ahead, because after that move, you can play here. That's the idea. Now, the tempo can help and sometimes it can hurt. I still think black's okay in this position, but it's kind of fun for white to think about playing this way. And it's one reason that some people play bishop f4 is they intend to play this gambit here. And other players just intend to play there, but they want to get, okay, this is the recent game, and I'm maybe get the order wrong, but this is the Carlsen game, is this position. It's another reason for not playing knight f3. You want the knight there early so that you can meet this move more easily, because you've cleared out your queen side more. That's the theory. In fact, this is how the game went. It went, or wait, maybe bishop f5 first. Yeah, I just saw this today, actually. I think it was played yesterday. And black played here, which is a good way to defend it, as opposed to queen b6. So, and it was about even, I think. I don't think Carlsen got much from the opening. But this is a nice way to play if you're going to play bishop f4 on the second move that you can't play if you play knight f3. So, the question here, though, is what happens on that move. And he has a new idea for black that's actually really fascinating. It's this move. He says there's only a few games in the database, and I think we may have even talked about this already. And he gives this as the main line, which makes a lot of sense because you're thinking about taking here. You've won a pawn temporarily. And I just noticed looking this morning that this is very interesting, this possibility. Now, I'm going to have to do this by memory, unfortunately, I guess. It's very interesting to think about gambiting this pawn here, playing this way. And then after that, maybe playing this move, knight here, knight to d5. And the idea is to threaten knight c7 check, and it's not easy to defend that square. However, it's possible that this move is okay for black, allowing that check, and then if he takes here, you just take here, and the knight's sort of stuck in the corner. That needs to be looked at. Interesting possibilities there. But it's true that unless you'd prepared this carefully, you might not want to do this as either white or black. You should be prepared for a line like this. So that's the line he gives. And then he goes through a long analysis of, let me see, black's move e5 and here and taking, and gets to a position where I think white is a little bit better. And he makes the side comment that this move is given, or that he's looked at this move, and this comes from Rubka analysis, and it's supposed to be equal. And I just want to say I like this line for black. I think black might even be a little better, or at least he's got a very comfortable position. And one way to demonstrate that is this move, to get pressure on that pawn, and also it's just a very nice diagonal. And I'm not real sure how white should be handling this, because if white makes a move like this is probably the best move, but then black just takes. And I find it hard to believe. You have a 2-to-1 majority, and white's well developed, but so is black, reasonably well developed. So I don't see any reason why black shouldn't be just fine here. So this would be a very comfortable way to play. I'd rather be black in this position, actually. So I guess the rest of the variation that he talks about here maybe isn't really that important. Because even if white is a little better here, black doesn't really need to play this way. I think this knight f6 move is a complete answer. And as the person asking the question says, if that's all true, that knight c6 works, then maybe this whole e4 gambit is no big deal. Black shouldn't be afraid of it. So this is a very interesting move that he's discovered here. And I think it seems to work. It seems to hold up. I'm not sure how white can try to get any advantage here. There's bizarre moves. One of the computers recommended doing that. The idea being that now after takes you could play knight b5 after queen takes. And the other idea being that knight b5 is a threat. And so for example here, c takes d4, e takes d5, queen takes d5, knight to b5. But even this, I don't know if it really works that well. Maybe he just plays here and then e5. But anyway, some interesting little things going on. I don't think knight a3 is that strong. I looked at it, and I think it's reasonably okay for black. Okay, so we've been on quite a while now, and it's supposed to be roughly an hour, and I think we've been on about an hour. So let me just check. Okay, here we have one more question. I would like to answer the chat questions. Hi, I'm from Stockholm, Sweden. That's nice to say. How do I learn typical endgame patterns? I'm a 1700-ish standard on ICC. For tactics, there are many ways to practice, but not so often endgames. Well, most endgame books have practice sections in them, so at least there's that. There's also online, which is usually where there are a lot of endgame exercises online, but there's also computer, in terms of databases, there's some great databases. You can always look at the lists of endgames, like the Encyclopedia of Chess Endgames. And I think those are typical endgame patterns that you get from those kinds of collections. I'm trying to think offhand about patterns. You know, maybe endings aren't that pattern-oriented. There are a lot of them. If you look at theoretical endings, which you need to know, maybe they're fairly elementary, but you have to know them. Some rook and pawn games, they're unique to the position. They're not terribly patterned. I love the rook ending books. I love rook endings generally. I think they're just the most wonderful things. And there's a great one. There's a guide to rook endings. John Ames has one. That's one of my favorite rook ending books. We talked about that before. I'm trying to think. Endgames tend to be fairly unique. I'm not sure how patterned they are, but certainly to study endgames, there's plenty of books. There's countless books. I have a million of them on my bookshelf, and people all have a favorite one. Maybe we'll get a suggestion from the chat audience about a good one. David Howell's endgame book was always widely praised, and Dvoretsky's endgame manual is a little complicated, but that's a good one. As far as you're actually thinking about getting practice, I think there are online endgame. You might check the Chess Tempo site or some other site. Look at some websites and see if they have endgame practice sections. So I'm afraid I didn't answer that very well. I'm not really sure, but I think the resources are out there. And as far as getting patterns, I'm not so sure. I think practicing your basic endings you can do by just finding some of these either problem books or things online or DVDs that have training exercises. You can also get something that lists all these endings and how to win them, and just put them in training mode on ChessBase so you don't see the next move, and practice them that way. Okay, folks, I think we've come to about a natural closing point here. Thank you, everybody, for coming on. And oh, here we go. Chess Tempo is a website. That's what I was trying to say. I should have mentioned that. And oh, what's a good chess psychology book? I think we'll get to that next time. I'll save that one for next time. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you. Well, actually, next week I'll be gone. I'm traveling, so I hope to see you 2 weeks from now. So that'll be at the same time, same place, hopefully. Thanks, everybody, for listening.